So I am super excited to be here with you and talk about something that I am very passionate about that has probably been an evolution in my career, and that is that the importance of building classroom community, because it really does support student success and student retention. I love this quote by Helen Keller because I think it epitomizes, and especially in light of the fact that, right, she was both deaf and blind, and yet she understood the power of a group and a community to lift and empower people to rise to something greater than they were individually. And so, and the reason why that matters is because later on I will tell you every day at the beginning of class I always put up some sort of quote. And so that's one of them that I use. So let me tell you a little bit about my institution. We are the largest undergraduate institution in the state. We're also open enrollment, and we have a 35% first-gen population. So we have students that stumble in there, really don't know what they're doing, right? We have others that have gone on to the Mayo Clinic and med school and dental schools. So I teach, this broad spectrum of students with various levels of preparation. And so being able to get them to work together in a group and build that community becomes essential, because some of the students have skills that are very helpful and are going to help them be successful. Others have no idea what they're doing, but have potential if it can just be refined. And so it becomes very important that these two groups of students and everybody in between has the opportunity to learn from each other. So I have found that building positive social interdependence becomes very important, and there's two ways to accomplish this, right? You want to build relationships with your students between you and the student, but also it's very important to have give the students the opportunity to build that relationship. I've actually found that those relationships are more powerful than the relationship that I have with them. There have been multiple, not enough that I could do a research study, which is probably a good thing, but I've seen it enough that I will have a student that will miss class for a week or two, and I will say to their group, because I assign my students the first week of school into groups, and I will say to the group that they stay in all semester long, hey, call so-and-so, text so-and-so, tell them that you need them, that they're essential to your group's performance, and that, get them coming back to class. More than, I'd probably say I've seen it 6 to 8 times. Their peers in this group will get the students back to class, they get them up to speed, and they will pass the class. They don't pass with an A, but they will pass the class. And to me, that is powerful, right? Because if I send emails and nag, hey, we need you, whatever, they're going to blow them off. But when their peers are saying, hey, we need you, it has the ability to draw them in a very powerful way. All right, so one thing that's really important is to help the students build really cohesive groups. And we all know, as I was joking about yesterday, that some of us still need therapy clear back from our college and high school days from doing group work, right? Because you get social loafing. And that's one thing that I really work to prevent from happening, so that there's this positive feeling in the group. And so there are 3 things that I do to specifically do in the process of building these groups. So I remember one of my students asking me, how should I stay for this exam? How should I prepare for this class? And I said, we'll get in a study group. And that was the question that they asked me, how do you form a study group? Which was completely unfathomable to me, because I was like, you walk up to somebody and you say, hey, do you want to get in a study group? But recognizing that my experience as a student might have been a little bit different than theirs, I helped them with this process. So there is a web page that's called the Comprehensive Assessment of Team Member Effectiveness. It's www.catme.org. It is a web page that was built by the business department at Purdue University. And the whole focus was on how to build effective groups. The thing that's really great about this tool is that based on criteria that I put into the web page, I can send an email to my students using their university email and ask them to complete a survey. Now, of the things that I'm interested in, number one, the times they're available to study, because what I do is I build them class groups, their in-class group is also potentially a study group that they can use outside of class. So I've built them study groups, right? But in the process of building these groups, I also am interested in the sex of the individual. In science, it has a tendency to be very hostile to women and certain underrepresented groups. And so I'm very cognizant of those kinds of issues as I'm building, how committed they are to the material, and then their majors. UVU is a commuter school. So we don't really have resident housing. And so that is another reason why students have a tendency to fall off the grid in our classes. Just as a note, generally speaking, 2/3 through the semester, if a professor is lecturing, you'll lose 1/3 of your students by the time that we've progressed that far in the semester. But the problem is group work is messy, right? Like it can get really chaotic really fast. And so one thing that I think is important is building structure into these groups so that you build this positive social interdependence. One thing that I do to help build this structure is that everybody has a job that they rotate every day. This is a card that I pass out. Everybody has a job, right? So I've got a manager, a reader, a scribe, and a spokesperson. And I teach first-year freshmen, which I absolutely love because they have no idea that what I'm going to do with them in my classroom is completely unorthodox. So I get no pushback, right? And so I just say to them, okay, here's your job. And this card explains, like the manager keeps track of time and their job is to make sure that the conversation helps them stay on task, right? The reader obviously reads. And the reason why that's important is because I want the group members pacing together. Okay, nobody gets to work ahead. You all have to work together. And I'll explain why that's so important in just a minute. Then you have the scribe. And the scribe is yes, about writing, but more importantly, it's about helping the group come to a consensus answer. And I tell them, this is the only time I want you to all write the exact same thing, okay? And then the spokesperson's job is to communicate with me or any of my teaching assistants. So they raise their hand. These are the people that represent the group and answer questions anytime I ask like the particular groups to report out or if they have specific questions. As I said, they stay in their groups all semester long, and I use a timer in class. So I'll be like, oh, you've got 10 minutes to get through this material. When the timer goes off, the students know that I will say, okay, spokespeople with your fingers, right? Do you need 5 more minutes? Do you need 2 more minutes? How much more time do you need to complete this section, right? I've also been wandering the classroom. My TAs have been wandering the classroom. I have a pretty good sense of and you have to be careful with this because of course you get somebody that's like 6 and then everybody else is like 2. So, you know, you're looking at the average of the time that students are asking for. So that's one thing. More recently, I ran across this book. It's called The Collaborative Classroom. The author is actually a high school teacher, but one thing, and it's interesting because he offers suggestions on how to deal with introverts and a variety of these issues. It's a very easy read. I went through it really quick. But the thing that I took out of it is this idea of group contracts. And so at the beginning of the semester, I say, okay, students, as your group, you're going to write a group contract. And the group contract contains all of these elements, right? So what's your contact information so they can get a hold of each other? What are your goals for the semester? And you need to come together to consensus as what these group goals are going to be. So what strengths do you have that's going to help your group accomplish these goals? What can you offer to help with, right? What do you have to share? Also, where are the areas that you might need assistance, right? So we can do this give and take. This is your strength. This is my weakness. Let's come together and work together. Member agreement. So how are we going to treat each other, right? If we set a study group, what's the latest that you can, say, hey, I can't make it. You can't just, not show up. Or how are we what level of preparation are we going to have for class? What level of preparation are we going to have for the study group? And then accountability. I will tell you, this is the hardest part for them to fill out because they're like, oh, well, we'll talk to him. And then if they don't behave, we'll just go talk to the professor. And I'm like, I am not your mother. You already have one of those, right? And I'm like, no, you have to come up with steps. And so, then they've come up with things like, oh, they have to bring drinks for a big gulp or something, or donuts, right? And you have to do push-ups. But the ultimate thing, and I will explain it in just a minute, is that they have the opportunity to take a group final, and the group can kick them out of the group final. And so, and then they all sign the contract. So there's this clear understanding, and norms have been set for this is how we're going to treat people in the group. This is what we're going to do when behavior is not what we've agreed to, right? And my goal is to not manage all of this, right? I still got to teach the class. Another way that I build this positive social interdependence is I-clicker polling questions. I use them all throughout class. So at the beginning of class, I use what we call retrieval practice or testing effect. Because my students are non-traditional, first gen, they aren't real comfortable with the testing process, and I have a lot of students that struggle with test anxiety. iClicker has been fabulous for this, because at the beginning of class, I will set like 3 or 4 questions, because I refuse to take attendance. I'm like, no, you guys can manage yourselves. But the first questions at the beginning of class are over material from the previous class, right? If you know anything about retrieval practice, it says helping students recall information, especially in the new context, helps them better retain it, especially for assessments. And so that's my goal in setting up those initial clicker questions at the beginning of class. Now, they can work on them. I give them really hard questions, some that I would never give to an individual student because they would take them out at the knees, right? But as a group, I let them work as a group. They can answer individually, but they can talk about it, right? And so they come to a consensus answer, and then they submit their answer using iClicker. Also, after I get done with my active learning activity, I will also give them polling questions, because I often think, oh, they've got this down now. And then I go, oh, they didn't have it down now. And it's a great way to do a check-in and to make sure that what I think they understand, they actually were able to grasp, right? Some people are like, well, how do you deal with all the points? I just say, hey, if you get 85% of all of these polling questions correct at the end of the semester, I'll give you 10 points extra credit. And so then I'm not dealing with, oh, you were here, can I make them up? No, right? You just have to get 85%, which I feel like is a pretty low bar, right, for 10 points extra credit. So the other thing that I do to build this positive social interdependence is to do, we do active learning in the classroom, right? So I don't know if you've heard of POGLE, process-oriented guided inquiry learning, but I use a lot of those types of lessons in the classroom. Now, why is it so important that everybody write the same answer? Because I really work to tie their grades together in a way. And so after they're done completing the activity, I roll a dice. I tell them to alphabetize their first names, and 1 through 4, whatever the dice lands on, that's the packet that I am collecting. And I tell them that whatever the score on that packet represents everybody's grade in the group, right? So now it becomes very important that they're helping each other, that they're explaining, that they're writing the same things on their packets, that they're working together as a group and they're pulling together, right? And so, and you might be like, well, what do you do if a student has missed class? Well, I allow them to drop 2 assignments, right? But I tell them, in order to get credit for the packet, you have to be in class when the packet is collected. I don't care if we did 2/3 of the packet the previous day, right? If you're not there when the packet is collected, you don't get credit. So then they have this incentive, right? So we've been building groups, they're making friends, right? They understand that the material is presented in class, and to get credit for the packet, they have to be there, right? And so it really makes a difference in terms of student success and retention, because we know very few students can skip class and still really be successful. Okay, and then this is the bone that I hold out in front of them, and I tell them, hey, in this class, you can take a group final, right? But there are some conditions to being able to take the group final. You have to be a good group member, right? And I explain to them, a good group member is not one that knows everything. A good group member is one that shows up to class prepared. We know that we're talking about DNA and the structure of it versus cellular respiration today? Who brings the appropriate materials, these packets that I talk about? Who is willing to say, when somebody says, I don't understand, is willing to explain or say, hey, I don't understand as well, right? To work together as a team and to pull together. Because 3 weeks before the final, I say to the students, okay, now is the time you get to decide who's taking the final, and they make the decision, right? Now, we've all been wandering around class, you know who's there, you know who's been helping, and you know who hasn't. But I refuse to make the decision. I do say to the students, okay, if you want to kick somebody out of your group for the group final, that's fine, but you have to run it by me, and this all has to be decided by the last day of class. Because the morning that we walk into the final, I have a 2-hour period for finals. I have to write a final that's short enough that they can complete the final in about an hour and 15 minutes. That represents the individual final, which is 70% of their grade, right? Then I collect all the finals, they get in their groups, I distribute the same final back out to the group, and now they can work on the final, their group final, right? And they only submit, like they come to consensus answer, they submit one answer that represents the group's response. The reason why I like this is we always want students to be learning, right? And even in the final, you want them to be able to correct misunderstandings, gain new insights. And so the group final allows them to do that. And to be honest with you, it's also an enticement, right? Like, hey, this is the reason to stay in class. This is the reason to keep coming and keep trying, even though I may fail, I may bomb, right? All of these I have set up so that the students are building these relationships. And it's so funny because we get to a point in the semester that they would rather just work with each other and talk with each other than have me stand up and lecture. Like, they really get kind of grouchy with me when I'm like, you guys, I have to lecture about something. I don't have a packet for you, right? Because they just like working with each other so much. And to me, that warms my heart. Because the first day of class, you walk in, it's dead silent. Nobody's talking. Towards the end of the semester, I just have a hard time getting them to be quiet so I can talk, right? Okay, so the second part, how do I build a relationship with them? Well, you heard me reference myself, they call me coach. And the reason why is I used to think about, like, there's such an antagonistic relationship that can develop between a professor and their students, and I really hated it, right? And I also wanted them to understand that I am not, like, the source of all information, especially in light of AI, right? But everybody understands what it's like to be on a dance team or play basketball or volleyball, or we understand the relationship that happens between a player and the coach, or the performers and their coach, right? And so I tell my students, call me coach. And the very first day we talk about, well, what does that relationship look like, right? So let's say I'm a volleyball coach. I can write the plays, I can watch the game film, I can make suggestions on how to spike the ball, right? But if you don't practice, when we go to game day, life is not good, right? And students pick up on that so quickly. And so just as a reminder, I just say, call me coach, right? That's my name, call me coach. And it's really funny because I've had students say to me, yeah, my professor one of my peers was asking me, like, who's my professor for biology? And they're like, I don't know, her name's Coach. The other thing, though, along that same line is, as I have taught over the years, the biggest thing that I've come to understand is that students need a cheerleader, and especially my students. Up the hill from me is BYU, and I joke that those students are born on the professional track, and 3 minutes after birth, they have a trust fund, right? That is not my students at all. And so I will share quotes. Like the first day of class, I always put up, you are braver than you believe, you are stronger than you seem, you are smarter than you think, by A.A. Milne. And if anybody knows, what's that from? Winnie the Pooh. It's from Winnie the Pooh. Right? And so each day they walk into class, before we start the clicker questions, I have a quote about teamwork, persistence, failure as a teacher. How can failure teach you things, right? And believing in yourself. Sometimes I share personal experiences, like the first time I tried to teach, I hyperventilated, my head ended up between my knees, and there was no teaching, right? And so I'm like, I could have said, I'm never standing up in front of a group of people ever again, right? Or I could say, okay, well, what could I have done differently? And I learned from it. And so periodically I will share those, but I have found, like, students will say to me as they're walking out of class, Coach, I really needed that quote today. That really meant a lot. Thank you. Students have even called me their UVU mom, right? Yeah. But why does all of this matter? So one day I was watching my groups, and I remember this girl, her name was Charity, and she said to her group, I don't understand what's going on. And I stopped her group for just a minute and I said, if I were standing here lecturing, would you have said that to me in front of 50 people? And she just laughed nervously and she's like, there is no way. And that's the power of the group right there. Because two things happen in a group when you say, I don't understand. Somebody will say, oh, it's okay, I gotcha, and then they'll explain it. Or somebody else will go, I don't understand either. And maybe the third or the fourth person is like, I don't understand either. That gives them the courage and the validation to go, oh, let's ask the TAs, let's ask Coach. Everything's okay, none of us understand, we're good, right? And to me, that is a huge thing that helps students stay in class, not feel isolated. They're the only ones that don't understand, right? The group, working as a group, really prevents that from developing. What do I see? Generally, students get 1 grade higher. If I'm going to lose students, I lose them the first 2 weeks of class because they're like, this group work thing is not for me, it's for the birds, and I'm out of here, right? But after that, they stay with me, and they stay with me the whole semester. And so I have colleagues that have, low retention rates. Like the biology class that I'm telling you about, it's on the top 30 failed courses at the university, right? And I don't see that because of the importance of building classroom community. The best part for me, I love teaching this way. I have more one-on-one conversations with my students. I get to know their names. I get to know their personalities. I know what their goals are. And it makes such a difference when I sit down and try and write a letter of recommendation for them because I know them. And to me, that makes all the difference. So collaboration is hugely important. A LinkedIn survey of 2,000 business leaders, they pointed out that they would much rather have people who can collaborate than the hard skills of just, can you do these particular things? Most employers are now saying today, they don't care what employees know, they care about what they can do. This is another study, a little bit older, 2015, right? This was the poll, right? This is what they care about. Can you effectively communicate in an oral and written fashion? Can you work in groups? Can you critically think? Can you apply your knowledge in real world settings? And so I tell my students, like the nature of these POGO lessons and what I have them do in class, I'm like, what you've learned to do in this class, you should put on a resume. Right? I started out in a group of people. I didn't know any of these people. We pulled together as a group. We learned how to communicate. We learned how to help each other. We learned how to work in a team. And this is the grade I got. And so I'm like, this is why it matters. Right? Aside from just helping students be successful in the course, you're also talking about setting them up to be successful in life. Right? And really, that's, in my mind, as educators, that's why I'm there. That's why it matters.